Hi, everybody. Welcome to Grayscale's deeper dive into render. As always, the purpose of these are to help investors understand these protocols, make them more tangible, and hear firsthand about some of the use cases. We're going to be joined today. I'm excited to be joined by Render founder Jules Erbach and the COO of Otoy and executive director of the Render Network, Trevor Harris-Jones. Before we do that, I am going to read some disclaimers, so just bear with me for a few minutes. This call is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be, nor should it be construed as or used as investment, tax, or legal advice, an investment recommendation, an IRA provider recommendation, or an offer to sell, the solicitation of an offer to buy any digital asset or security. Clients of Grayscale may maintain positions in the digital assets discussed on this call. Any opinions expressed throughout this webinar are solely our own and do not necessarily express the views or opinions of Grayscale or any of its affiliated entities. So with that, let's jump in. I'm going to turn it over. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. To dig into the questions, can you first provide some background on yourselves and how Render came to be created?
Sure, I'll go first. It's a pleasure to be here. Render came out of about my background. I mean, I started a technology company called Otoy, which creates computer graphics software for artists. Typically, you get Photoshop for 2D art. Otoy creates tools like Octane Render for 3D artists. So we've revolutionized the visual effects and motion graphics space by providing pixel level rendering on a GPU for about 12 years now. And typically, artists that start with their work and render on one GPU want to have more. Our software scales basically linearly with more GPUs. And we partnered pretty early on with Amazon, Autodesk, and some others. And we actually helped design the first GPUs that were put on AWS back in 2013. And we were sending our customers that would do these large scale renders to those GPU cloud providers, but they would run out. NVIDIA's pricing, NVIDIA dominated the GPU cloud space. The pricing for those things basically hasn't really changed per render in a long time. And the solution for us as a business was to look at the vast amount. There's hundreds of millions of GPUs that are in people's machines, pretty high end. And in fact, they're for the kind of workloads that we're doing, they're about equivalent to what you'd see in a data center. They're a tenth the price. There's a huge amount of them. And so the Render Network was born out of a desire to decentralize the compute capacity that was in limited supply and still is limited supply on centralized data centers or cloud providers. And we actually still have to this day Amazon, Azure, Google Compute as clients for the Render Network, but we also have there's a million GPUs on our wait list. We have hundreds of thousands of active nodes that are running, and those can provide that rendering power that you see on Amazon, for the equivalent of a tenth the cost, and it's much faster. And this decentralized approach is something that now I think people are taking an even stronger look at, because there's this huge demand, of course, for AI. A lot of it's on training, but also inference. Render Network is perfect for that as well. And we're also very focused on consumers and artists and creators that can use this system to do things they couldn't before. So even whether it's major motion pictures from Paramount, we have Disney and Warner Brothers as investors. The Render Network's a lifesaver, and we have individual artists like Beeple, right? They create their art on on our system, and because it's on chain, on the blockchain, every single thing that you do has provenance. So if you want to know where something came from, whether it uses AI or rendering or graphics, all of that has a receipt when it's using the Render Network, and that also has a much greater utility, I think, in the world that we're in now, where what's real and what isn't is becoming a thing. So that's sort of the background and history of how we got here.
Amazing. Maybe, Jules, I'll chime in and say hi to everyone too. Hi, I'm Trevor. Thanks for having me here today. I came on board about 3 years ago on the Otoy side, really with a background of scaling SaaS companies and SaaS products. And what really interested me was, Octane Render, Otoy's flagship product, had a scale and a product market fit that was envious and made a lot of sense. I immediately got enamored by the render network side in the deep-in model that was applied to it, and the opportunity that really was emerging for a usage-based model for software scaling. So that kind of pulled me in, and from there, it's been an amazing ride as we've decentralized the project more and more, and as it's become a community-driven project now, in its entirety.
Thank you. So I want to take a step back and just maybe give a 30-second overview on GPU sharing and talk about the render network itself and how you're using blockchain technology.
Okay. Well, I touched on that a little bit earlier. The blockchain part of it is, I'll start there because it's really interesting. If you are creating an image on the render network, typically you're going to be sending 3D models, textures, images, but all those are hashed. So when you first upload something, let's take Beeple, who is probably one of the better known artists that individually is using the render network is an advisor. And of course, NFTs were a thing, but there's a deeper value to having a receipt and a proof of how something was created, and also who contributed the assets to that. So if you're going to use something from, let's say, Getty Images, there's a hash for that image. Doesn't matter whether it's used for training or as a texture map in a 3D render. The output of that can be proven in terms of its composition, and you can also then create royalty streams. So in other words, if you have a 3D model or a 3D head or a scan of yourself, one of my closest friends and advisors for 20 years and helped me build O2 and render is Ari Emanuel. Owns Endeavor, WME, talent agency, and we've been working with scanning in talent for 15 years. Their heads, their digital likenesses are things, for example, that if that gets used in a render job, there could be a trigger for that. There could be an access control list. There could be royalties paid out. So in the future, where things are probably going to be generated live compositionally, even without AI in the mix, having these GPUs that are there to validate proof of work, proof of render really, is I think a much better use of electricity and value than just sort of hashing numbers, which is typically what a lot of the older blockchain models have done. We've I think provided a great value both in terms of the utility and also a true use for blockchain, which is to prove where something came from and to even build revenue streams and business models that you can leverage that. And that's sort of the blockchain part of it in sort of a quick summary. On the decentralized GPU side, again, there are millions of high-end desktop GPUs for games. NVIDIA grew into the nearly $3 trillion company that it is, selling video game cards, and that was where we started as well. There was a huge history of millions of GPUs being used back in 2017 when the render network actually launched to mine Ethereum. And we were just basically going to be paying 50 times that because it's somewhere between the cost of a GPU hour on Amazon and what Ethereum is paying, right? We fit in there. Today, there's GPUs that are, we've been featured, by the way, in about 4 or 5 Apple keynotes because of Octane Render running so well on the iPad, on the Macs, and Apple Silicon. We work really closely with their engineers. There's a future where your phones and your iPads can not only be used to create the same kind of graphics that we used to target, 5 or 10 years ago on desktop, but also could be part of the render network. There's workloads that you can run on these devices, and there's millions of them that can provide this ambient computing power. And it's something that I see the demand growing. I mean, it's almost become a mainstream in the last 2 years. Where you have people saying GPUs are like the new gold. They're effectively more valuable than many other types of commodities. So decentralizing and building a system and having the deep background that our team does, almost 20 years doing GPU work, has really led us to this place. And I think decentralization also goes hand in hand with a lot of open source, open models, right? That are, that are very powerful, that are very competitive. And I think that, as AI becomes much more of a factor in people's lives, and certainly in the kinds of creative efforts that we want to supply to our customers and just artists in general, and democratize that decentralization and GPU decentralization in particular, I think fit really nicely with these future trends.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about the different players in the network. So do you want to break down a little bit for folks just how it works between, for instance, somebody who is an artist and somebody who is a node operator and where the token fits in?
I'll start with the artists and node operators, and I'll let Trevor talk about where the token play comes in, because we have changed that model in the last couple of years. But effectively, artists are artists and creators that we've been servicing through our software like Octane for 10, 12 years, and that's growing. And we do now have entry points for artists that are using iPad or iPhone, and for them, it's almost when you hit print, right? When you want to print something out, you send that to the printer. You send video to be encoded if you're on the cloud as well, in more mundane use cases. For 3D rendering, same thing. There's a button within not just the tools that Otoy creates. We brought in all the other third parties. We've invested in building infrastructure for free tools like Blender. We've worked with Maxon, Autodesk as a partner, where you just send that offline job to the cloud, and it does all of this rendering for you on these nodes. Now, whether that gets sent to your GPUs that are on AWS, which is where we started, and it's this cost and it's this level of security, or it goes to some random node operators system, which could be one of millions of GPUs that are out there. The artist doesn't really have to think about it. There's different tiers. So if you're not AWS, or you're not providing a data center level GPU, then you can charge a lot less. And in fact, what's interesting is we did have a job for running the net render for the remastered Star Trek movie that Paramount did. And they went to the, they didn't run it on AWS where it's MPA certified. They ran it securely and then encrypted on GPUs that were out there to get the project done in time. And so the industry and even the high-end, highest-end tentpole movies have leveraged render and the decentralized nodes on the render network, which means that technically your GPUs could be rendering a Marvel movie or a Star Trek film. And for node operators, when we first started, it was very simple in terms of this scalability. You get paid in the amount of raise per watt that your GPU is providing to finish this render. Now we have more sophisticated workloads that can mix neural rendering, AI, ray tracing hardware that's now actually just doubled right in the newest iPhone that Apple announced. And I think that the payout system has always been clear. Node operators make more money providing their GPUs for these kinds of real world workloads. But the ways that we've sort of expanded that, especially as we moved from Ethereum, which is where we started, to Solana, has a lot of layers to it. And I'll let Trevor take it from there and describe some of them in more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Jules. Yeah, it's a broad, diverse ecosystem. So you've definitely got creators at the core of it, and many of the creators who submit work are also node operators. That's part of the benefit of the system here, that they can use their idle nodes as a battery to essentially build up credit over time, and then when they have jobs to do, have those jobs done in a fraction of the time and cost it would otherwise take them to do it. So it's really this flywheel for a creator. But it's grown beyond that. Obviously, there are other types of nodes as the workloads have shifted. So there's a diverse range of node operators. And at the core of all of this ecosystem is the render token, which is really what's used to drive and grow the ecosystem. So it's used for emissions, which are payouts to node operators for work done, for rewards, for availability, and for helping the community move forward, like, for instance, upgrading from Ethereum to Solana. And even on the supply side, on creator rewards for artists to help supplement, doing either groundbreaking work on the network or just helping expand the network, referring people and driving the ultimate success of the project. So those are the two key constituents. Outside of that, we also have what we call clients, compute clients, who integrate directly to the network. And those compute clients can be folks like studios who want to do rendering work, or can be platforms that are looking to leverage other types of jobs. So we have AI type work on these nodes, and really are part of a broad ecosystem that is centered around the render token.
So you guys have mentioned AI. Something that we've talked about that has been top of mind for folks has been, the proliferation of AI technology, specifically the opportunities around decentralized AI to mitigate some of the risks associated with this. Can you talk a little bit about how the AI theme fits in with render?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start from the artist and creator's perspective. And we have Ahmad, who started Stability AI. He joined our advisory board earlier this year, and he's now sort of looking at seeding many different things in the AI ecosystem, that are beyond his original company, like that Black Forest Labs that create Flux, that is the new hot thing, and image generation. I think that powers, for example, Grok's image generator. I think there's and our artists, I think some of them love AI and they understand exactly how it can be used as a tool. I think that's where we're seeing things going as well. It's an accelerant. It doesn't take out human creativity. There are some reports that feel it's too simple to type in a prompt and get an image back. But from the render perspective, it's clear to us that rendering traditionally, Jensen, CEO of NVIDIA, has said this as well, you're moving towards neural rendering. Neural rendering is not just 3D graphics as we know them, but it's with AI infusing and filling in the pieces and doing a lot of the work that even GPUs traditionally have done in creating those graphics. It makes it easier for artists to iterate. And I think that as you also get into the way that, typically learning a 3D tool has been extremely hard and a barrier of entry. So having AI, even LLMs that are more familiar for people using ChatGPT, running within Render and being able to link services together will make content creation, ideation, development really simple. So on the artist side and the creator side, the path is clear. We've also built a lot of really great technology. We've been having AI denoisers, things that finish your renders since 2017, long before the current blow up in everyone's focus on AI. And I think that from a competitive perspective, if you're trying to get business as a creator or as a content person or you're creating high-end films, you still want to have a competitive edge. And humans understanding how AI systems work is not that much different than learning Photoshop or learning CG graphics in the first place. There's so many layers of creativity above that. And the one thing that people really do want, though, that's a big step from before is they want to be able to prove what they did and how they did it and where these things come together. And Render does that. That decentralization, where the finalization of those images, not just for the compute utility, but also just so you can prove where these things came from and have that receipt on chain, is critical in that world. And on the GPU side, on the supply side, obviously, I mean, NVIDIA's value is built on the fact that AI is being run on high-end NVIDIA GPUs, and it's not just the crazy high ones for training. If you're using it for inference, a lot of text to video generators that you're seeing, all those things run pretty well on consumer GPUs. And those are the kinds of GPUs we have a huge amount of on the network. So from our perspective, the work that we've been doing now since 2017, just with Render Network itself, with traditional rendering, easily blends in with all the new layers that we can be mixing with AI. But as Trevor pointed out, and I'll let him sort of touch on this as well, we do have compute clients. So if you just want to bring your own business and use the network GPUs to build a system that is a lot more like AWS, you can do that with our hardware. And we provided that for a number of compute client partners.
Yeah, great, Jules. Maybe just to add a bit there, it's obvious that there is a shortage of compute. When you look anywhere, there's supply chain challenges in manufacturing enough compute for current demand, let alone for future demand. So the obvious place to find that compute is where there is available idle compute in a decentralized form. So it makes a ton of sense that over time this is going to shift over and become more and more relevant, just given the shortage. However, where we stand today, most, at least as it comes to LLMs, training is done on centralized infrastructure. And there are a lot of reasons why that makes sense. That was sort of where it started, but isn't necessarily where it ends. And when we look at the opportunity here, the way I like to equate it for folks is rendering today on the Render network is offline rendering. You're sending a job, not real time, but for use at a later date. There are a number of rendering or AI use cases on the inference and training side that could be done in an offline first type scenario. They don't have an immediate need. So not ones where you're running a prompt for an LLM or a prompt for an image, because those are potentially real time, but others. And I believe, as you look out, you'll see a first wave of these offline type jobs being the AI jobs that become pervasive on distributed devices. But these points will merge as we move towards real time latency is a challenge, and having edge processing really makes a lot of sense. So, I think the first next step will be somewhat offline, and then we'll see a blend in those towards fully real time and online. And at that point, I think the lines between what is done in a centralized training center versus distributed will be very different. I think a great example of this is if you look at how Apple is doing their intelligence. It's a combination of on device, in cloud, and centrally, that I think will become a roadmap for the use of these distributed networks in a way that really hasn't been seen to date.
So we've talked about, you've mentioned the different use cases and the way folks are interacting with this technology. I always say that I want to make these things tangible. So can you all show, the folks watching and listening, some of the things that have been created, some of the things that have been rendered, so to speak?
Sure. Should I can,
Yeah,
what I can
why
do
don't
here,
you go
I
ahead
can
and share
share.
your screen?
Yeah, I can share a screen here. The simplest point I send people to is our foundation website, which I think you can all see here. This is just a very small snapshot of items created and rendered using the render network. Every year we do a show reel. It's used by NASA, award-winning games, Emmy-winning artists for the intros and the endings of movies, even VFX, and pretty much every motion graphics use case. So it's staggering how many potential use cases and current use cases rendering has.
So these images are stunning. How do you think this changes for the next 3, 5, 10 years? How do you think the way folks interact with this technology, with the network, and the use cases evolve?
The mission for both Otoy and the Render Network for me has been to democratize content creation, because lots of brilliant ideas and a lot of artists, and the barrier to entry has been cost, complexity, resources, right? So we solved that problem 10, 12 years ago by providing GPU rendering, which which allowed you to do things that used to require $100 million render farm. I think that similarly with AI and the way that's heading, being blended with the kinds of efficiencies we're seeing, you're going to have a lot more artists, right, that can be coming in not just from a PC with high-end 3D software, but things that can run on the iPad or the phone, and leverage those tools to create content. And I think that's something that's going to be accessible to, I think the addressable market for Photoshop, like 25 million artists. I would say that you're going to probably have several hundred million or even a billion people that could be generating beautiful work, that'll still be creative, and it won't just be typing text into a prompt. Those tools are coming. I think that they'll definitely be arriving on mobile in a way that I think has been, just hasn't been possible, 3 or 4 years ago. And you also have devices that, even Apple, right, when they put out the Vision Pro, their glasses, I mean, you're moving towards not having screens and having something that's closer to ambient computing. So in 3 or 4 years, I expect the way that operating systems look, the way that media consumption will work, right? If you're making movies, you're making short form content for social media, all those tools will have some version of what we're building in render. The distribution of those things and even the authenticity and provenance of those things will also go through render or a system like it. Obviously we also want to sort of push open standards, have things work together. But I do think that the ability for people to create and tell stories and create media is going to be so different and so much easier and more powerful. It is going to level, it's going to give a lot more people that ability, but you're also going to see artists and creators, as they already have, looking at how these technologies advance and building their own techniques around it. And I think that's very exciting. So we're definitely heading towards a spatial holographic AI infused consumption and creation ecosystem. And I think render is built for that future early on.
Yeah, I love that Jules went there. When you think about where the display of content is going, you're seeing large scale display infrastructures like the Las Vegas Sphere out there, and other global copies of those. And our technology is ideally suited towards creation of that content. And on the 3D front, as you see Apple, Meta, and Samsung all making a step into 3D display, the great thing about that is the 3D content requires an exponential step up in compute power. So as we've gone through, and we've lived through many of these, watching video go from grainy video to 4K video, and seeing the step up in compute needs only grow. And as it moves from where we are today towards these types of displays, the Vision Pro and others, there's an exponential step up. But some of the displays Jules is talking about that are even further out, that don't need goggles, that are more ambient, are another exponential step up. So every one of these jumps not only will bring groundbreaking different content for people to consume, but permeate the need for more and more GPUs.
Well, that's definitely, I'm getting excited listening to you guys about what the future can bring. Let's talk again, just coming back to the token. Can you speak a little bit about the supply and the emission schedule?
Sure.
And also maybe talk about, we've moved from Ethereum to Solana, what the reason was and what that's meant in terms of throughput?
Yeah. I can start there, Jules, and then have
Sure.
you chime in. So in terms of the model, the community last year voted for us to upgrade the model and move to what is called a burn mint equilibrium model. For me, the key difference in that model from our previous model is it separated the receipts from the payments in a way where an emission schedule is set on a fixed basis for 25 years, and the community gets to drive how those emissions are then allocated, and really to where the network needs the most to grow. So, there was an initial vote, and then midway through this last year, a refinement where the community decided to allocate two different initiatives, including to node operators for doing work, including to creators, and to participants outside of that group who are helping with the migration or the upgrade from Ethereum to Solana. And the community also voted on that change. I think when they were looking at changing the model, it sort of made sense to look at changing the platform, given it was a wholesale change at that point. And what drove the community towards Solana was it had become a deep in hub at that point, number one. So there were other projects that had actually already implemented similar models, particularly Helium had open sourced a fair amount of the available models to implement this model on Solana. So that was kind of a number one. But number two, I think the throughput and cost on the Solana side were multiples less than our previous implementation. And a lot of that is really important as the network scales. As you heard Jules talking about on-chain provenance, more and more of this is going to be happening on-chain at a scale that we needed the throughput and the cost to match. Jules, I don't know if you've got more there.
I think that's a great summary of it.
And in line with this change, we've seen there's more activity, there's higher numbers of daily active addresses. How are you guys thinking about this, and how are you measuring? What are the KPIs you guys think about in terms of the growth and success of the network?
Really, for us, it's all about growth of the network, and it's a two-sided marketplace. And so at different times, you hit different needs. The stage we're at right now, we have an abundance of compute. We have a large wait list. So a lot of the focus is really on utilizing the current GPUs to get to the point of opening that up and bringing on more and more work. So it's very much focused on work. And the great thing about the model is that is now on chain. The receipts from artists and from compute clients are actually burned on chain. So the community is able to track the growth of the project over time, and it's a phenomenal thing to be able to see a community-driven project tracked in that manner. Just one thing you'd said on the last, you wanted me to talk about the supply or just the total tokenomics. That was really set in that change when we moved model. We do have a fixed total supply. However, that supply goes down as the network is used and as tokens are burned for usage. So there is a hypothetical total fixed supply, but one that is dynamic and therefore tracked on chain as work happens along with it.
So for everybody's benefit, when there are transactions, tokens are burned. I think that's a salient point. So coming back, so thinking about just more so the broader landscape, what do you consider to be competitors? What makes Render differentiated?
I mean, I'll start by saying that, well, obviously we were really early and the first to do this. But I think that there are competing projects that are doing DeepIn, right? Here are GPUs and here's and I kind of feel like that doesn't. I mean, that's a sliver of what we provide. I mean, we started and built Render, right, because we had the demand side figured out with artists and creators, and the depth of that technology and our depth of even GPU engineering is more than just connecting a GPU to somebody that wants to run something like AWS. In fact, we have that there. Instead of competing with projects, we brought in about 6 other on-chain compute systems that just plug into Render, and we sort of work those things out. So there's nothing else in the space that's really addressing the market that we're in. I think that also things are extremely early, with AI. So to sort of think about where that is going, if you're starting a DeepIn project around GPUs, what are you doing? If you're starting something where you're trying to collect a bunch of H100s or these crazy things, it's hard to compete with centralized data centers where that's all interconnected, because the jobs that currently are required to do a GPT-5 or GPT-4 need those centralized systems. But that's today. And I think that some other projects that I've seen are probably over-indexing into that, although we can certainly bring on H100s from any of our tier 1 partners like an Amazon or a Google. What's interesting for us is the future of training and learning is probably going to evolve a little bit like the context windows in LLMs and ChatGPT, where you can feed 300 books, right? And when the context window is 1 million tokens, you have to trade it on a million books. And that's going to be true of art and generative AI as well. So that means that the GPUs that are at the heart of the Render network don't have to be these very expensive ones. Training will probably still have these large baking steps, but over time we'll move towards being able to run things like LoRa's, where you send 20 images and that defines how the AI generator works. And all of that can happen on much lower end GPUs. So I think that from the perspective of, I mean, even if you're doing text-based AI, right, all those things are turning multimodal. There's a rendering process in there. And what I don't see really in any other project is all those things sort of blended together in a coherent way that sort of goes beyond a simple flat compute model. And I do feel like that's one of the big differentiating factors, and especially us being on chain and having that provenance piece. That's pretty important. We have we have major studios like Warner's and Disney invested in us, and we're doing real projects for them and Paramount and others that leverage that very system. So I think that's a really unique place for us to be. And we're also very open to partnerships. So sometimes, what might be a competitor turns out to be a really great partner. And we look, all of these projects and lift themselves up, and the unique pieces that we provide, I think, are something that we want to spread the wealth a little bit as well. And that's where the compute client ecosystem evolved from.
And I think that's helpful just for, again, in terms of making things tangible. Names like Disney, movies like Star Wars, these are things that are going to resonate with folks. So these examples are really helpful. Thinking about just the future, what do you think? What have been the challenges, and what do you think are the challenges going forward to greater adoption and to what you see like the long-term vision?
I can take that on. I think the challenges have been, we actually have a huge number of paying customers using Octane, and we don't have a huge number of them that have been moved on to Render. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So the challenge we have is we want to get all of those artists onto the Render network, and we also want to build a whole new layer around users that have never touched 3D graphics in the same way that we have on desktop. To the first point, it's taken a couple of years to get licenses from the 3D software that people use in their computers and to put them on a decentralized network like Render. Never been done before. We did that with Maxon. We're working with Blender. Blender has 2 million artists, right? So I think going through that process, and we've just made huge progress this year on that, is going to increase the number of artists touching the Render network significantly. The layer after that is to again probably in some ways redefine the way that high-end graphics could be generated and done from devices like the Vision Pro, mobile, iPad and iPhone even. And Apple's been really a wonderful collaborator on that front. And so I see that as being critical in the future as well. The other challenge is what I was mentioning earlier. I mean, AI is still really early. What we think we know about it, today in the forms that it's in, is going to change significantly in the coming years. And so and I think that change will be probably for the better. It'll be more controllable, more reliable, easier to blend in with services that are not necessarily as fuzzy as AI, right? And I think when that happens, as I said, I mean, my goal would be for Render to enable 1 billion people to be able to create beautiful content, and to have that also be the very same tool, just like we've done with Octane, that are used by very high-end studios or very high-end productions. And I think beyond that, as we've seen, when users now can see, or anyone following Render can see, when we burn tokens for a big job, sometimes people ask me on X, what kind of job is that? I mean, and sometimes it is a studio job, but a lot of those things, like when you're doing something for the Apple Vision Pro, if you're generating a high-end render for that, that's pushing things up. The more and more the actual screens, the endpoints change, the more use you're going to have. And I do feel like that's like level one. And the other pieces are going to be the kinds of systems and economic models you can build around the provenance that we have. I think with AI in particular, and I talked about this with Ari, because of the fact that, I mean, obviously people's likenesses, their talent, licensing model, all those things depend on this. I mean, deepfakes are the least of those problems. I mean, you could do so much with neural rendering that I do think that having a system in place early on that allows brands, people, even individual artists to control how their work not just gets used or not used, but just how it gets remixed, how they can make money from that. It's a whole interesting model that I think Render is really well poised to provide, and I'm excited for that. And as Trevor sort of intimated, there is something beyond wearables and the stuff that Meta and Apple and Google and Samsung are working on, which is true holographic displays. I think Google even showed sort of a two-way window, right, where you sort of see a 3D thing without any glasses. Those displays are coming. They're going to be like OLEDs or flat screen TVs. They're just, once they're mass produced, they'll be cheap, they'll be everywhere. And that is, to me, that's like the Star Trek holodeck. That's the vision that we want to prepare for. And I think Render and the tools and the software and the services that we're trying to bootstrap and to engender and support are going to line up really well with that reality. And I don't think that is decades out. I think that's in the coming 10 years, you're going to see true holographic experiences come to consumers and be something that redefines sort of how we experience all of the digital content that we now see through screens or read on a on a web page.
So we're getting close on time here. I do want to shift. I want to take a few of the questions that have come in from investors. Let's talk about the GPU supply chain. This is something that has been a topic. It sounds like it's heavily concentrated with a few manufacturers. How have you been affected by supply shortages? Excuse me. How does the concentration of GPU affect you guys?
I mean, for us, since most of our GPUs are consumer cards, not at all. As I said, there's definitely a need that's present today for very high end, whatever Elon's building, 100,000, clusters with infinite band connecting all these things together. Those cases, yeah, there is a constraint there. What we're seeing though is when that training is done, right? The AI then has to deliver, right, inference results to the end clients, and that's something that the GPUs that are in plentiful supply, consumer GPUs, that's where we're focused on, and that is also one of the differentiating factors I mentioned earlier. And then there's also interesting things like being able to leverage 100, 200 million Apple GPUs that are now as advanced as NVIDIA GPUs in the data center on Amazon were 6 or 7 years ago. So I do feel like we're well positioned to not necessarily be pushed by those constraints. And also, of course, I mean, those constraints are easing a bit. I mean, there's less of a crunch even on the high-end data center GPUs today than there was about a year ago. And Trevor, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add on that note.
Yeah, I'd say the constraint only benefits the network. Because what it does is it pushes people to look towards other distributed solutions. and that's really the core benefit that the network today can bring is a wealth of distributed GPUs that could be used. So you start to see them think about these use cases and pick off pieces that can be pushed outside of a centralized cluster just because of the shortage of high-end GPUs.
So essentially, it's a problem that you're helping to solve, and something that's making the use case even more relevant, so to speak. How about, okay, let's talk about just from the perspective of the users, of the artists, can you talk about any data or metrics that demonstrate what their economic perspective is in terms of cost savings from using the render network?
I mean, I feel like if you're in a position, and so our very first customer, I love sharing this story, was when we turned on Render in 2017. We'd had Aqua users for a while, and we had the cloud render in AWS for a couple of years at that point. The first customer was a man named John Knoll. He created Photoshop. He's also the head of all the visual effects at Lucasfilm with ILM. Worked with him for years, does all the Star Wars stuff. Good friend of the company. He was doing something for the Hayden Planetarium, and he was rendering it in Octane Promoto. And he's like, guys, how do I do this? I need to deliver this, tomorrow, and it's going to take 40 hours to render. I don't even know what render farm. He was our first render customer, and not only did this thing come in at a price that was, had we even rendered it or had the amount of GPUs on AWS to render it, it wouldn't have come in time, but it was also a tenth the cost. So we can deliver GPUs, for example, if you look at spot pricing for GPUs on AWS, it is about an eighth, or tenth the cost of what reserved or on demand is. But you don't get that because you run out of GPUs. Whereas the supply of GPUs we have can deliver a huge amount in bursts. And for the artists, it's a lifesaver. There's most people that are using Render and use it all the time have basically built it into their workflows where there's no way to deliver this. If we're doing content for studios as a proof point, and also we partner with companies like Paramount and others, where there's just no way to deliver this on even the public cloud at any reasonable cost or in any reasonable time frame. And that's the experience I think any artist that's using Render and doing so more than even once will tell you. So I think that describes the value proposition for those artists, and that's today. And I think in the future, again, you see that even with to Trevor's point, of Apple, right? Have they ever really put Apple GPUs in the cloud until just now for AI to mix that securely with what they're doing locally? No, but I do think that again, you're going to find that as AI becomes more infused in workflows, even for content creators that we've been supporting through our tools, there is going to be a lot more back and forth to the render network, not just for offloading high latency jobs, but also things that are near real time. And that again is something that being on the edge, as Trevor was mentioning earlier, is going to help significantly with.
Yeah, to add to that,
I think we're almost at time,
okay.
So we'll squeeze in another minute. Go for it.
Okay, I saw a video yesterday that will be released soon where it's a grant recipient talking about using the render network, and they had their own infrastructure and calculated it would take 12 or 13 hours for them to do their render. And they show using the render network, the work is done in less than 30 minutes, and the cost of that render was $12. So you're talking significant time savings at a pretty marginal cost to an artist. 12 to 13 hours of time not working on their computer, not being able to use it because it's rendering is pretty significant to anyone doing a commercial undertaking. And so just an idea of the scale, it really is significantly affordable to anyone using the network.
That's a really good example, and that's extremely compelling. Unfortunately, we're at time. I want to thank you guys, Jules and Trevor. Thank you for joining us. This has been, I think, really helpful. And I hope that everybody has a great end of the day and a great rest of their week.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. Thank you.